So if you've watched my Down the Rabbit Hole series, I think it was episode 3, where I spoke about something called fantasy prone personality. Now in this video I'm kind of going to touch up on that as well as some other things and my personal experiences and how I feel something like that has helped me a great deal with lucid dreaming. So as I mentioned in that video, fantasy prone personality is a sort of group of personality traits in which a person is very deeply involved with fantasy. Now it kind of goes beyond the usual kind of daydreaming. Some people may find that they experience imagined sensations as real, so if you just imagine being touched, you will feel that sensation, or if you imagine being burned, you will feel a burn, and in some cases, you know, your mind kind of believes that you've really done those things. So what happened with me, which I spoke about in that video, was I basically created a burn mark on my hand because I kind of really felt like I'd done that to myself. You go watch that video, I explain better there. In a nutshell, it is this very deep involvement with fantasy. It's this thing where I guess your brain kind of struggles to differentiate between something that's imagined and something that's real. Kind of similar to psychosis, but not quite. Although usually in you know, like diagnostic tests that they do when trying to diagnose you with certain mental health problems, usually they do involve the fantasy proneness scale when it comes to things like schizophrenia. So it's not a disorder, it's basically just a personality type, a series of personality traits which you don't get diagnosed with it. Part of that is something called maladaptive daydreaming, which is essentially someone who is always daydreaming, always living in their own fantasy life. And the reason why it's called maladaptive daydreaming is because it's basically kind of gone beyond what the norm is for daydreaming, and it affects one's life to the point where, you know, they struggle to function with everyday things. They spend more time in their own world than they do out in the real world. And you know, some people do find it quite helpful. They find that it might actually help them deal with and process certain things in their lives. But for the most part, a lot of the people who feel that they have maladaptive daydreaming find it to kind of take over their lives and be quite stressful and distressing at times. So for me, you know, I've always had a very deep involvement in fantasy. You know, before I kind of started hearing voices and the whole psychosis stuff kicked off, I would say that I don't know if I would say I heard voices or I saw things, but my imagination was so vivid that a lot of the time what I was thinking almost became projected into the world around me. So I kind of would see things and I kind of would hear things. It was like my mind was amplified, and that has always been the case for me. I think that's just how my brain is wired. It's not a result of any kind of trauma or anything like that. That is just how this works for me. But obviously being kind of so involved in your own world means you kind of do neglect things in the real world. And I say real world just because hey, what's real, you know? So yeah. And I've always found myself more connected to fictional characters than real people. I'm not exactly sure why, it's just something, that's just how I am. So, you know, I spend a great deal of time in my own head, in my own fantasy worlds. Things like books and video games and films, I get so sucked into those worlds, you know, and I develop such strong emotional bonds with characters. Like, I can't even create these bonds with real people, so, you know, I do get very attached to characters. I mean, there was one character in a video game that died, and I felt so sick. I couldn't even like eat, right? And I've never experienced that with like a real person. It's very embarrassing. I don't really like talking about it, but at the same time, someone's going to talk about it, and you know, hey, why not me? And I remember it got to a point where I felt really lonely in this, and I typed something into Google. I can't remember the exact thing that I typed into Google, but I put something along the lines of, you know, I feel more connected to fictional people than real people. And I found all this information about maladaptive daydreaming, and I was really stunned, because even though I knew there must be other people who have this, I didn't realise that there was this whole community, and that there was a lot of people that actually had this. So, you know, maladaptive daydreaming is not a disorder, it's not something you can be diagnosed with. Again, it's more like a learned behaviour, a personality trait, you know. Although there has been quite a lot of research on it, it hasn't really, they haven't really developed that much on it, you know. I guess it's something that isn't at the forefront of mental health research. But there was a great community that I was a part of. I may have got kicked out of that community, it's a long story, but it was a really great community, and I learned a lot about that, and there were so many other people who seemed to have this. And the reason I bring it up is I wonder if that has helped me with lucid dreaming, because I'm always visualising, I'm always in my mind, I'm always somewhere else pretty much. And perhaps my ability to visualise, perhaps my ability to kind of almost experience my imagination as real has kind of helped when it comes to lucid dreaming, because I can kind of put myself in that mindset, if that makes sense. Now, you know, everybody else on the forums that I was on I don't think there was anybody else who did lucid dream, but I was always really interested to see if people were interested in lucid dreaming, because again, I guess, you know, all these people wanting to experience their own worlds, I figured, well, why not learn how to lucid dream, because then you can do it. On the other hand, there is that concern of, if you start learning how to lucid dream in order to live even more deeply in this world, is that going to actually cause more problems in the long run? Because we can't escape the real world, unfortunately, and is that just going to kind of reinforce this need to escape? But I kind of think it's helped a lot with my creativity, maybe, and I do think that creativity is an important part of lucid dreaming. I don't think a lot of people really talk about that or acknowledge that, but definitely I find with writing or drawing, doing things that are creative and engage that part of my mind seems to really help me with my lucid dreaming. So I guess I'm interested to see, one, if anybody watching these videos identifies as having maladaptive daydreaming, or identifies as having a fantasy-prone personality, and if those people engage in lucid dreaming or would want to engage in lucid dreaming, or just how they feel it has affected their lives, I guess. I mean, I will leave information like in the description box if people want to kind of read up more about those things. But that was kind of why I got into lucid dreaming, was because of that, because I thought, oh hey, now I can like live in my own world, this is fantastic. And I ended up actually learning more about myself and actually learning how to be more comfortable in the real world, so it has actually been really beneficial. So what role does imagination play? I don't know what that was. What role does imagination play in lucid dreaming? How big a role does creativity have in lucid dreaming? Are people who are very, very deeply involved in fantasy more likely to lucid dream? And then I guess my other question would be, people such as myself who are a little bit insane in the membrane, are we more likely to lucid dream? You know, those of us who kind of have a little bit of trouble finding the balance between what's real and what's not. Hey, but what is real? So that's pretty much all I have to say on this. I apologise for this quite rambly video. It wasn't scripted. You may have been able to tell by the amount of times I've said, well, I mean, you know, well, you get it. I may make a drinking game out of that. Like how many times, you know, I just said again for fuck's sake. Right, I'm ending it there because I think that's best for everyone. So thank you very much, guys. Feel free to hit that like button if you have any questions or comments, anything you want to say to me. You know where to leave them. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. I have been Max, aka TheRaRaRabbit. See you in the next video.